Hello! In this video we're going to have a look at debugging a source code that is only available on a remote machine. For that we'll be using Visual Studio Code with the PHP Debug Adapter. To start, I have an empty folder on my normal machine. I will now start Visual Studio Code and open my project. To be able to edit the code that I have on my remote machine, I use a plugin, the SSHFS plugin. As you can see, I have two extensions enabled, the PHP Debug plugin as well as the SSHFS plugin. To bring in my remote files into my current workspace, I will use the SSHFS extension to do so. So I click on the icon and now I need to make a configuration. I will call this one remote xdebug.org website. For now, I will make sure that this location is only saved in my workspace settings and not the global settings. Now I will need to add all the information. The only important things are here is the host name and the path on my remote machine. I will also specify the username. You can enter your password here, but it will show up on the screen. It will also get saved in plain text, so I'm not going to do that and instead select prompt. Which means that every time it makes a connection, it will ask for my password. You can also use private keys and passphrases and things like that, but as I've not set it up, I won't be using that. And then the rest is not very important, so click Save. Now I have the remote configured and I can bring this into my project by clicking the Add as Workspace folder. And now it prompts me for my password. And again. When I now open this remote, you will see the source code of the Xdebug website. Let me log into the remote machine and start its web server. Usually I use my makefile, but that is not good enough here because it is configured to use a debugger on localhost, not my remote host where I have VS Code installed. So I will have to modify this a little bit. I also need to make sure I use an actual PHP version. Instead of localhost, I use 0000 so that I can access it from my other machine. I have set Xdebug's mode to develop, debug, and I will also enable the discover client host setting. This will mean that Xdebug will try to connect to the machine where the HTTP request came from. This now works, so let's see if we can make a request through a browser. I just need to remember the port 9874. In the browser, I am now displaying the website that is run on my remote machine. Now let's get the debugging going. First of all, I will make sure to enable that through my browser extension. And now I will have to enable the debugger in VS Code. I go to the Run and Debug window, but I first need to create a launch file now, because we have not configured that yet. I will be putting this in my empty directory that doesn't have any project files. The only configuration that I really need is listen for Xdebug. So I will select that here and click on the Start Debugging icon. Now it says below here it's listening for debug connections. Now let me request a page in the browser. And little happens. What we really need is to break that first line in our script to see whether everything works. I do that by configuring stop on entry and set that to true, of course. I will now stop the debugger and try again. With stop on entry, VS Code will always stop at the first line in my file. I now start the debugger and request a web page. On the VS Code side, I now am getting an error that says the editor could not be opened because the file was not found. That is because, of course, I don't have any files locally, but I do have them on my remote machine. Normally, what we can do here is to create a path mapping. We don't want to create the file, of course. So let me stop the debugger and create a path mapping now. Now, the problem is, what is actually the file name that was used here? Because on the remote side, the path should be home http www.xdebug.org html-router.php. But in here, what is this file name? In order to find out, what I can do is to set a breakpoint. In order to see which breakpoint is actually being sent, we have to create an Xdebug log. So let me change the web server configuration to do so. I do that by setting xdebug.log and the log level to 11. And start a web server. I will now start the listener in VS Code and request the page again. And of course we're getting the same error as expected, but we should have a log file now. Let's see what's in it. We can find in this log which file name the IDE sent to set a breakpoint on by searching for breakpoint set. As you can see, it used something with ssh:// in it. And then it has the configuration name. Of course, that's not an actual path, so if we even set a breakpoint, they would never get triggered by Xdebug. And if you scroll further in the log, you'll actually see that too. Because Xdebug is trying to see whether there's a breakpoint on this weird file name, whereas of course the location is something like this, the path on the remote machine. Now this is a normal occurrence, and in this case you usually need to make a path mapping. So let us set up a path mapping for this weird path, starting with ssh:::. Path mappings map a remote path to a local one. The remote one is this. And locally it is this form with ssh::: in it. We are now back in our router file with a breakpoint set. So let me start the debugger and try this again by requesting a page in the browser. In this case, I'll just click on a link to do something different. And indeed, it now stopped right at the breakpoint where I'd expected it to be, which is great news. I will remove this breakpoint actually and set it a little bit further along to see whether this breakpoint will also get set correctly, and I will click continue. And indeed, it also stops at this line. I will now stop this and disable the break at first line, or stop on entry as VS Code calls this, so that we can do breakpoints naturally. Start it again and request the page in the browser. And indeed, it now stops at line 11 as we expected. Let's see if we can jump into other functions as well and whether that works too. And yes, it indeed jumps into the autoloader too, which isn't the most interesting one, but it will display the files as they are available on a remote machine. I have no local source code whatsoever. This shows that it is also possible to debug remote-only code. The only problem at the moment is that VS Code will still have to have the launch.json file in a local directory. Hopefully in the future we can improve on that as well. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this is useful to see that it is possible to debug code on a remote machine only. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.